Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to 50 by 50, whatever happened to the Harvard class of 1976. I'm Michael Conniff. I'll be your host, and very happy to say I'm a member of that class and am extremely happy and interested personally to bring in an expert on aging, and I'm sure many other things. Bruce Troen is, I'm going to give you his titles in just a second, but I also have to point out he is one of two or possibly three twins in our class. So it's Bruce and his brother Mark. We'll maybe talk about that a little bit, but both went to Harvard. Bruce is chief of the geriatric division at the Kansas University or University of Kansas Medical Center, known as KUMC. He's also the director of the Landon Center on Aging, and maybe not the least of his titles is he is a physician investigator in the VA hospital, the Veterans Administration hospital system. So that's a lot to start with, Bruce. But did you and your brother get to the reunion?
Yes, we did. Absolutely. We enjoyed it.
So thank you. This makes my job so easy because as you can imagine, and I'm sure you heard about this and participated in it, maybe topic A is, and I'm going to do a little paraphrasing here, people looking at the other members of the class and saying either one was, we look pretty good, two was, we look like shit. So which was it, or both?
Well, actually, I discussed this with some of my classmates. So first of all, speaking as a scientist and empiricist, it was a self-selected group of individuals, obviously. But I actually thought that, for the most part, folks looked fantastic. That was my takeaway.
I know you do, Bruce, and I know I do, but I'm not sure about the rest of them.
Go
ahead.
It was interesting. It was sort of a guilty pleasure, of course, to see how people had fared over the 50 years since we had last spoken to them. And there were a number of people whom I think I'd seen some at our 25th, but some I had not seen or talked to for 50 years. So there was a spectrum, no doubt about it. And it's, as someone who's keenly interested in aging and how we can maintain our functional and cognitive capacity, I was very interested in making those observations. But again, I recognize that of the 400 plus that showed up, presumably there were some selective factors, people who were eager and willing to show up, who were able to show up. There probably were both medical and maybe socioeconomic reasons for that. So I don't know if we can draw any fierce conclusions about the overall body of our class. But in general, I thought it was really great, and it was wonderful talking to folks. And I thought most people really looked very good.
Okay, well, that's going to have to pass for a ringing endorsement. Yeah. But let me drill down on this because it's so interesting to be able to talk about our reunion, which is the purpose of this podcast, and our lives to get there, how we got there, and where we're going. But it's really interesting to think about this because you are looking at this question and answering this about our classmates through a different lens than anybody else there, I think, or virtually anyone else. Maybe some doctors have a similar way of looking at things. So help me see what you saw through your eyes. What were you looking at? What were you noticing about how people had aged?
Yes. Well, the first thing I look at is mobility, the ease and grace with which people can carry themselves, can get around. And for the most part, there were folks who could do that without assistance, though there were some notable exceptions. A couple of classmates who were actually in wheelchairs, some who had significant reliance on assisted devices, as we would say, but a cane. So that's really the first thing that strikes me. And it's one of those things where, as a geriatrician and as a physician, you start your physical exam, though I don't want to say that I was just doing a physical exam during our reunion, of course, but you start that even when you're across the room from an individual. So you get a sense for how that person is carrying themselves, how they're moving, how they're breathing. And then, of course, once you start talking to them, you get a sense, though it's not always an accurate one, of what their cognitive capabilities are. Now, of course, in referring to our class, I think we can assume from the outset that they're all with very, very high cognitive capabilities. Though, for me, as a geriatrician, my day-to-day work in the clinical setting is often with people who are significantly cognitively impaired. That's at the VA setting and also here at the university. So it's something that I'm keenly aware of, but I really did not have to give a second thought to that during our reunion. But in the past, I actually was the founder of a Center of Excellence for Alzheimer's Disease. That was at the University of Buffalo. And while there's a separate Alzheimer's Disease Research Center here at the University of Kansas, the head of that is actually a co-principal investigator with me on a major grant that we're hopefully awaiting a notice of award for funding in the next few weeks on resilience as we age. So I think about this on a daily basis, but I want to stress that I was not doing or even trying to do cognitive assessments on our classmates. I was just enjoying having the opportunity to talk with so many folks.
Well, I like to say some of the dumbest people I ever met went to Harvard. But listen, I want to stick with the mobility for a second. And just break that down a little bit. Obviously, if somebody's in a wheelchair, if somebody's on a cane, if somebody has a walker, and there are a few of those, what are the things you look for or notice on the rest of the population?
Yeah.
What are the signs? What are sort of the bad signs? Let's start with the bad signs. What are the
Sure.
bad signs?
So we know that mobility, or gait speed more specifically, is correlated with mortality. It's a mortality predictor. And the threshold seems to be about 0.8 meters per second. And once you drop below that, your increased risk of dying and having other significant medical comorbidities really rises very, very much. So one of the tests that can be done in a geriatrics clinic, though not so often, unfortunately, as I would like to see it, is actually just measuring someone's gait speed over maybe 3 to 10 meters and seeing how they do. It tells you a whole lot. Something else.
You actually measure that.
Oh yeah. Now it's often used more in a research setting, because if you think about this, are we often in a clinical setting where you actually have the hallway and the marked off measurement, so you've got the actual timing of somebody for what they're doing. But in fact, there's been a lot of research. There's something called the get up and go test, where you look at how someone arises from a chair. And by the way, if they do that without using their arms, they're already much ahead of the game. Getting up from a chair, walking a few meters, turning around and coming on back and sitting. You learn a tremendous amount about that. And I would say in concert with that, though we don't often see this in the clinical setting, but more the research setting, if we know someone's grip strength, then we know also that it's a predictor of frailty, an indicator of frailty, and maybe a predictor of mortality in the future. And it's really about functional capacity. So if I may expand on this a bit. So as a physician, of course, I'm eager to be able to take care of someone who has a pneumonia, if someone has hypertension, if someone has arthritis or heart disease. But in many ways, geriatricians really are trying to think more holistically and interdisciplinarily about how we can maximize function. And when we try to maximize function, we're not focusing on a disease per se, but maybe on a number of different syndromes. For example, if you have cognitive decline, that's not a disease. Multiple diseases can cause cognitive decline, but that is a syndrome which has an impact on your quality of living, your everyday life. So many of us in geriatrics, I guess I would say almost all of us, are really focusing very much on what is the optimization of health span, not necessarily lifespan, right? I mean, no one wants to live a long, long time if you're not able to enjoy that. And the motivating paradigm nowadays is something called the 4 M's, sometimes the 5 M's. So the 4 M's refer to what matters, mentation, mobility, and medication. And the 5th M sometimes is tossed in as multiple comorbidities.
All right, me those again. Give me those again, because my cognition is a little off. So what was the first one? Was what matters?
Yeah, what matters, and it's absolutely the most important. If you think about it, if someone has certain wishes about what is important for their medical care, you might not send them to the intensive care unit if that's not what their goal is, if perhaps they're 85 years old and there are other things going on with their life. Now, that's just a simplistic example.
So what matters to an individual patient?
Absolutely right. And that's something that physicians and healthcare systems should care about. Because if you know what matters, you not only are hopefully going to serve the patient, you're actually going to probably do it in a more cost-effective manner. So you wouldn't unnecessarily be pursuing significant interventions if the patient and the patient's family don't want them. The second one that I rank is mentation. I think none of us want
Okay,
to be.
you got to define that for me.
Okay, so meditation is a very broad term, you're right, but typically we think of how you and I are able to interact, a cognitive level. And there are multiple cognitive domains, of course.
Your mental state or your
Yeah,
mental
right,
capacity.
right. A lot goes into that. Your language, your memory, your visual spatial, your executive function. All of these bring are composite, bring to a composite level your mentation. And that's something, as I was mentioning before, I deal with every day. So, for example, I have an outpatient geriatrics consultative clinic at the VA. And I would say 95% of the patients I see there are actually sent to us because they are cognitively impaired, in addition to perhaps having frailty, mobility issues. And so every patient I see, I can say this in an absolute way, in my VA ambulatory clinic, I do a cognitive assessment. And that cognitive assessment, by the way, is about taking an extensive history, about interacting with a patient, with a pharmacist and a social worker, because we're team-based, we're interdisciplinarily team-based, and then using some cognitive tools to help perhaps discriminate some of the potential deficits that the patient may have. And that's in the ambulatory setting. In the inpatient setting, I get the opportunity, the privilege really, for about 8 weeks a year of attending on an inpatient consult service where we see very complex patients who are often critically ill. And oftentimes what we have to deal with is something called a delirium. That's an acute confusional state. But very often what predisposes to that is an underlying cognitive decline. So even though as a geriatrician, I take care of a full spectrum of syndromes and illnesses, what matters comes first, and then the mentation is next. And then after that, I'd say, and this is a toss-up, it's mobility or medication. Let's start with medication. Medications, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I say that to almost all my patients, and of course, they all say, well, yeah, isn't that right? And it's not infrequent for me to be working with patients who are eager to get off of medications because they perceive that there are side effects. And that doesn't mean we just throw out the baby with the bathwater when it comes to medications. But I consider it a victory, and I say this to my learners. When I'm on rounds, I have either medical students or residents or fellows, that every time we can discontinue a medication, appropriately of course, it's a victory. So you want to treat what you need to treat, but you don't want to overtreat and therefore have consequences. And oftentimes those consequences are cognitive. And then, of course, mobility. And the mobility, well, if I can't get up from my chair easily, if I can't get up from bed in the morning, well, that obviously has a huge impact. So some of the things we think about when we think about frail individuals are they able to walk up a flight of steps without assistance? Can you walk a city block without assistance? And by the way, I think most of our classmates are not frail, fortunately. But my day in, day out, when it comes to patients, that's really a very, very big part of it.
And I helped my wife take care of her mother from age maybe 87 to 91.
Uh-huh.
But this goes for all of us. I think if you cannot get to the bathroom and back by yourself, it feels like that's the tipping point. Am I right about that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, yes, that's a great place to start because obviously there are consequences of not being able to get to the bathroom, which are perhaps often embarrassing, and though there should be no shame, but the self-esteem of individuals who can't care for their own needs. Matter of fact, there are two mnemonics that I go by for all my patients. The mnemonics are death and shaft. Death is a mnemonic which describes the basic activities of daily living. So D, can you dress yourself? E, do you need any assistance in eating? A, do you need some assistance in getting around? And then T for toileting and H for hygiene. It turns out that if you require assistance in any one of those basic activities of daily living, you have an increased mortality over the next 5 years. Now that takes care mostly of our physical functional capabilities. The shaft mnemonic is for what are called instrumental or independent activities of daily living, ones that may require physicality, but also require cognitive overlay. So the S is for shopping. Do you need assistance with that? H is for housework.
Mm.
A is for accounting. Can you purchase a cup of coffee? Can you do your checkbook? F is for food preparation, which is a very distinct difference than just eating the food that's placed in front of you. And the T, and it doesn't work out perfectly. Well, can you transport? Can you drive? Can you get a cab? Telecommunications. We have to sort of toss in a bunch of things. Can you work your phone, your remote control? It turns out if you require assistance in any one of those instrumental activities of daily living, then it's likely that you have what's called mild cognitive impairment. And mild cognitive impairment does not mean that you have a dementia. And oftentimes, particularly folks who start off at a very high level and have good socioeconomic supports, can cope with that. But people with mild cognitive impairment are at a much higher risk over the next year, 1 to 3 years, and maybe 10 to 15% of progressing with their cognition and maybe entering into the zone of dementia. So what I just told you about, I didn't mention any diseases, did I? I talked about really functional capabilities, cognitive capabilities, and I can tell you that geriatricians, that's what we care about. You know, it's interesting, Michael, you mentioned, are there any others in our class? So actually, I have a good friend, Don Jurovich, who is a classmate, who has been a geriatrician for just about as long as I have been, and we see each other very commonly a couple times a year. But Don is the only one I can think of, even though we have plenty of our classmates who went to medical school, who I know is a geriatrician. I think I know another one, Carl Coolin, though I didn't see Carl, though Don is an academic geriatrician and he leads a division also. So I think that we're not so present, unfortunately, and I would say that this is a problem because I think most of us understand in a very basic way that we have an aging society. So by 2030, 20% of our U.S. population will be 65 and older. Obviously, we in the class of 76 qualify there. And then by 2034, there are going to be more people 65 and older than 18 and younger. So we have this tsunami, really, a demographic shift, which is going to alter and transform not just healthcare, but our society. And I think we're not very well prepared for it. But let me continue one more and say this. Well, does that mean that we in the class of 76 are old? Are we seniors? And I think that there's a clear cohort effect here. And I think many of us are familiar that since we are technically baby boomers, that the baby boomers have done very well for themselves, not just economically and socially, but also from a health perspective. And that may not be true of subsequent generations. But I am eager to say that just because you're in the class of 76 and are somewhere between 70 and 72 years old does not make you an old person. It does not make you elderly. It really should be defined by your functional capabilities, physical and cognitive.
That's so interesting. And because I'm, still razor sharp, Bruce, I noticed you only mentioned 4 M's, so I need a fifth M.
Yes, the fifth M,
Yeah.
is multimorbidity. So many of our older adults that we care for don't just have hypertension, don't just have maybe renal insufficiency, they have multiple conditions. Matter of fact, even for those who are very well coping and are able to do things they want to do, once you're above 65, it becomes very common that people are on not just one, but somewhere between 1 and 3 medications, and probably have a couple of conditions, though we don't necessarily associate those conditions with frailty. So, for example, I have osteoarthritis in my left knee because I had a meniscus partially removed many years ago, and I was actually talking to one of my physicians this morning about that. Fortunately, it doesn't stop me from doing the things I want to do. But that's technically a condition. That's a morbidity. If I have high cholesterol, I guess I don't mind admitting, as many of us do, high lipids, and I take a medication for that. That's another condition. But oftentimes, the patients that I see actually have very significant multiple morbidities with heart disease, lung disease, and you can add on to this some of the cognitive and mobility issues, and that can put them in the frail category. And when you're frail, your ability to respond to the stresses of life and the stressors that are thrown at you, whether by disease or socioeconomic circumstance, is much less. So your resilience is diminished. And that's one of the areas really where I'm very excited that we have an opportunity to try to figure out what makes individuals resilient. How can they weather the slings and arrows? Is that how you say it? That we all face in life. So we can.
Arrows of outrageous fortune.
There you go. And be able to continue to do the things that we want to do that give us pleasure, that really give us what we call our health span.
Let me, I wanted to just make this personal, again, going back to our reunion. So a couple of weeks before the reunion, my back started to hurt. And I've always had sort of very low grade, from being a writer, I figure sitting all these years. And since then I've had an MRI and I've had it diagnosed as arthritis. This is more information than anyone cares about, but I'm going to make a point. Arthritis, stenosis, and here's the key one, a bulging disc.
Yeah, there you go.
I have never had anything, a bulging disc before. I have never had anything but minor back pain. But to me, this is really a dramatic moment in my health,
Sure.
Underscored only more by what you've just said. And here's why I'm thinking that I'd love your opinion about it. Because if I have a saying, which is if I'm not getting better, I'm getting worse. And I think with the back going to being able to walk, I can't walk now. I can't walk more than 100 yards now before I have to sit down. I've got ice on my back right now.
Oh, wow.
Pain's mild, but it's there.
Yep.
It's mainly so I can walk, get up and walk better. But anyhow, so I'm dealing with various things. And just parenthetically, I go to a big health center in New York, and I was so disappointed by the diagnosis. I was disappointed by the actual diagnosis, but the treatment, the doctor wrote me a note that was abbreviated. I didn't even know what she was talking about. It had to do with drugs, like drugs I could take. And it said nothing about PT, physical therapy. It said nothing about what you could do. So
I love this. Yes.
Here's the point I'm getting at. So I'm, I have a certain background as a journalist and a tech person. And so I'm looking for answers, right? And so within a week, I found somebody, just by talking to people, I found somebody who has a friend of a friend, who has used stem cells for their bulging disc with great results. Now I looked it up. I used AI to look it up, by the way, and I found that it's still experimental.
Oh, yes.
Basically still in trials, but it's going to take a lot to keep me from getting stem cells, to be honest with you.
So look, I love hearing this because I can opine about this, though let me say very clearly that the advice I'm going to give you is worth every penny you're paying for it. Okay? That's my disclaimer. Okay? But part of the reason why...
Your fee for participating in this podcast, by the way.
Okay, but part of the reason why I have a big smile on my face is that I have low back pain. I've got 2 tennis balls behind me. I've had herniated disc, and I have spinal stenosis. And actually, the doctor I was seeing this morning is a physiatrist who has treated me for that. But as a geriatrician, I am a huge fan of interdisciplinary approaches. And what does that mean? Well, you don't have to just rely on physicians. You can benefit from physical therapists or occupational therapists, or I think I alluded to in my consultative clinic, I have a pharmacist and a social worker. You don't need a social worker necessarily for your back pain right now. But I would say that it's, I guess I should be a little bit careful at this, but it's sort of a bit of a failure to resort to medications in this particular setting, and I can say this from lived experience and because I do know the literature and I take care of patients like this very, very frequently, physical therapy. If you're able and willing, and you've got to be willing as well as able to engage in regular physical therapy, that is so, so much better than resorting to medications. Not that you wouldn't necessarily need some analgesics to get you over the hump, okay? But
Right.
physical therapy is one of those things that we recognize it's evidence based, and we prescribe for many of our patients, and they don't take advantage of it. Now, many of my patients, it's very difficult.
Bruce, as you know, it's hard work.
Absolutely, there's no doubt about it, and certainly for my patients who are quite frail, though at any age and almost any level of frailty, you can benefit from physical therapy. But if you also have any kind of cognitive impairment, it makes it that much more difficult to not only participate, but also, once you're not necessarily going to the physical therapist directly, to maintain that regimen.
Yeah.
So I can
I
tell
get
you,
that. Yeah.
physical therapy can do wonders for herniated discs. I had a herniated disc, actually, this is before the pandemic, and went to physical therapy. It made a huge difference, and that's because I had I think most physical therapists, they're absolutely worth their weight in gold. They're
Yeah.
wonderful individuals who know how to keep you mobile to maintain your function. And with spinal stenosis, I also went to a physical therapist. Now, I got some other adjunctive therapy as needed, but I would tell you in a heartbeat that the main way I deal with my lower back issues is physical therapy. And this morning, I didn't go to a physical therapist, but well, surprise, surprise, I'm sort of a compulsive, focused individual. I absolutely did my physical therapy at home because I've got a great setup for it. I'm a big fan, if I can extend this a little bit more, into what can we do by way of exercise to keep our function up. So
Yeah.
some of the things we're studying are actually high intensity interval training. About 10,
I saw that in the documentation you sent me, and you know, I'm just a layperson. I know nothing really, but I did read maybe 10 years ago that a way to delay aging was interval training, and that it
yeah,
was the one thing. And if people don't know, it's like you go hard for a minute, you're off for you
yep,
go slow
right,
for a minute, you go, it's intervals, right? Whatever those
absolutely.
intervals would be. So I've been doing that for I do I'm on a stationary bike mainly, but I do 2 minutes hard and 2 minutes easy,
That's
and
great.
I don't know if that's the right interval. I do it for in all, I'm on the bike for 30 minutes. I have no idea if that's too much, too little, or whatever, but I do feel that I like to think that's helped. But
No
why does it
doubt.
work? Why does it work?
Well, um, well, in a couple of ways. So let me take you back about 9 years, I guess. So we've been interested in this, and I have a colleague here, Ken Saldine, who started with me as a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Miami. As you know, I've been around the block. We moved to the University of Buffalo in 2013, and then we moved here in 2022 to
You
the
move
University.
together. You move together.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm very fortunate that when I moved from University of Miami, University of Buffalo, I had two colleagues come with me, and one of those colleagues eventually went back to Miami. But 3.5 years ago, when I moved here and had a great opportunity, that opportunity was amplified by the fact that three faculty members also came with me, and I was able to offer them positions, and that meant that I had a ready-made team. And maybe we'll talk about teams in just a little bit because I think that's key to our success. But back in 2017, we published a paper on high intensity interval training in old mice. It was a 10-minute regimen where you warm them up very briefly, then you go very high for a minute, down for a minute, up for a minute. So they had it was 4 high intensity intervals over about a 10-minute period of time. At the time, when that came out, Gretchen Reynolds, who at that time was a science reporter for New York Times and is now a science reporter for the Washington Post, actually interviewed Ken and me and did a feature. So in one of the July issues, there we are, profiled in the New York Times. And by the way, of course, the currency of the realm are peer-reviewed publications, but I'm sort of proud to be able to say, well, how many people have a New York Times article about your research? Well, I mention this because even though it was in mice, we actually have used that same paradigm, which is a 10 to 11 minute high intensity regimen with three to four, mostly four intense levels. And we started examining that in older adults. And so we had a pilot trial that was supported by the VA in older veterans. And actually, that led to a much larger trial that we're presently carrying on to see if what is effectively a 10 to 11 minute regimen 3 times a week, and we do it either at the VA Medical Center here, or we can do it at home through our virtual with an iPad on a recumbent bike, what the impacts of that will be. Now, I can tell you from the pilot trial, we got some very positive results, but pilot trials not necessarily tell the whole tale. Nevertheless, high-intensity interval training has really blossomed as a focus of interest for many, many individuals. And part of the benefit is you get a lot of bang for your buck, right? I mean, the typical recommendation is we should all spend about 150 minutes a week. Think about that. It's a lot, right? So 5 times 30 minutes a week doing some kind of moderate exercise. Well, if you can spend 30 minutes a week in 3 10-minute regimens, wow, can that really substitute for it? And the way it likely does is it helps to maintain or even increase what is called your VO2 max, your maximal oxygen consumption. And we know that the higher your maximal oxygen consumption, then the greater your overall fitness and likely your longevity and health span too. And so what I typically do, and because I sort of live what I practice, is that 2 to 3 times a week, I do high intensity interval training. I also do some resistance training because we need to keep our muscles strong, because as we get older, our muscle mass declines, and so our ability to manage with that declines. So I do that 2 or 3 times a week, and then 2 or 3 times a week, I go ahead and do I call them my yoga, but they are part of my physical therapy regimen that I inherited from my wonderful physical therapist. And then, of course, if I'm lucky enough, I want to get out and play tennis, or if I can go skiing. So I'm not just training. I'm not just doing that. But I think all of that allows me to go play tennis. And I do play pickleball, too, and to go skiing. So, yes, so much of this. But so much of this depends upon being able to do it first from a social perspective, an economic perspective. And then if you have low back pain, that gets in the way. And I can tell you from personal experience, well, that has disrupted my training. And then I sort of shift to more of a physical therapy approach, which so far, knock on my wood desk here, has managed to keep my symptoms in check. But so much of this is really allowing us, hopefully, to maintain a level of resilience for when the unexpected things, and they will happen, occur. So whether or not it's going to be something over which we have no control, if we get COVID, for example, or if we end up, unfortunately, maybe being at risk for a heart attack or even an automobile accident, if your resilience is higher, and by the way, this is an active area of investigation, so this is not settled science.
I wanted to ask both about resilience and fragility.
Yeah.
And so when you're, again, looking at our reunion, 50 years later, we're all early 70s. What are the markers to your mind? It may not be, I'm not talking about settled science. I'm just saying you look around and you say, that person is fragile, that person is resilient. What's the difference?
So a gentle correction, I like to use the word frail, but it's interesting. So only about 15 to 20 years ago, even though we often talked about frail individuals, there wasn't a systematic way to approach them. But what's interesting is that even though we now have some systematic approaches, like grip strength and gait speed and being able to walk blocks, things I was talking about, many of us geriatricians also can look at somebody and see if they're frail. Now, I may not be able to look at somebody and see if they're resilient, and here's why. So if somebody needs a cane, it's likely that they're frail. If you see somebody who maybe has had osteoporosis and they have a curvature in their spine, it's called a kyphosis, and having a slow gait crossing the street, it's likely that person is frail. But here's the paradox. You might have a 95-year-old who is apparently very frail, But that 95-year-old got to be 95 because he or she is actually resilient. Okay.
Right. Right.
So we're trying to distinguish. So you ask an important question that is actually the feature I alluded to this, hopefully, this very large grant. It's a very large program project grant that we're waiting, as many of my colleagues are, because of the disorder, shall we say, when it comes to healthcare and scientific funding from Washington. We're waiting on, hopefully, a notice of award. And our intent is to study how can we understand and appreciate resilience. Does that predict frailty? And if we know those things, can we then intervene? And so I can tell you who's resilient, but not by looking at them. But if somebody can respond well to a provocative challenge that is non-harmful. So we do some tests like that in our research. Matter of fact, we published a paper just last year that looked at an age range from about 25 to 85, and we gave people some tests like putting their hand in cold water and see how soon they recover the temperature. They've got a challenge, they've got a stressor, and then do they resist that stressor? And then to whatever degree they resist that stressor, can they recover to come on back to baseline? If you go ahead and compress the blood flow, just like you would with a blood pressure cuff, and you reduce forearm blood flow, how quickly does it return? There are other ways to do this. So the VO2 max I was talking about, that's a stressor in a way, if you could measure that. Or I could say, in a somewhat less scientific mode, if I can see how well you climb a flight of stairs, or maybe 3 flights of stairs, and you're not that much out of breath, or your heart rate, which might go up, but which comes back down maybe in just a minute or two, then I know you're resilient. I mean, to show you the extent to which I sort of live and breathe what I talk about, I typically park in a garage that's that way about a block, and I'm usually on the top floor. Actually, it's the 5th floor, I guess it is. And so I don't take the elevator. I've taken it 2 or 3 times in the last 6 months. I go up the flight of steps, and then with my Fitbit, which is just a plain old Fitbit, I'm usually looking at what my heart rate is. When I get to the top, I typically go up 2 stairs at a time because I'm trying to think, how long can I maintain my functionality? And then to see when it comes on down. So that's a measure of resilience. But I can't.
How did you do today, Bruce?
Well, I haven't. Usually it's at the end of the day. So I parked there this morning and I walked down. At the end of the day, I mean, the key is if my heart rate. So here's another way, if anybody wants to pay attention, your resting heart rate can often be used to calculate, not perfectly, your maximal oxygen consumption, your VO2 max. So if you know what your resting heart rate is, and the best way to do that is to see when you go to sleep or when you wake up, then there's a formula, I don't remember it off the top of my head, that you can easily look at. It gives you a sense for what your VO2 max is, but also just from a common sense perspective, if you have a low resting heart rate, it usually means that you're in pretty good shape, and it likely, though we haven't confirmed this yet, means that once you're under, let's say, a physical stress, some demand, that you'll probably recover more quickly.
Okay.
So my resting heart rate is, when I wake up, it's around 45 to 46. It's pretty low, though I'm not a marathoner.
That sounds very low. Yeah.
It is low, but I might be able to give my parents some credit for it too.
Yeah. There's always, you mentioned genetics. It's the first thing in the speech you gave to the Harvard Medical School.
Yeah.
I did want to make sure that we touched on veterans, and you're a physician investigator in the VA system.
Yeah.
I had 2 experiences. I worked with veterans on the western slope of Colorado who had all kinds of needs. And also my late brother, who had a lot of health problems, literally spent 2 years in the transitional care unit, which is essentially like a nursing home within the VA hospital in Grand Junction, Colorado.
Ah, okay.
So I got to see it, every week for 2 years. I was down there to see him. And I think that veterans, my opinion, are talked about and even worried about all the time, and not much happens.
Mm.
So the VA is going through some changes right now. But what I'm curious about in your line of work, now you've got the Vietnam veterans, right? They're all geriatric now, right?
Yeah,
Almost by
yeah.
definition. What are you seeing among that population that's different than, say, our Harvard class of 1976 population?
That's a great question. So veterans are different. They're special. And I'll say up front, there's nothing quite like it when a veteran says, "Thank you, doc." It sort of fills my heart. I love it.
Hmm.
Uh, they've been through things that the regular population is not. And by the way, I tend to see some of the most frail and or cognitively impaired veterans because of the very nature of why people send them to me as a geriatrician who hopefully has a holistic and interdisciplinary team, a holistic approach and interdisciplinary team to deal with them. So there's no doubt that the spectrum of illnesses that they face are very different than the general population. And a lot of this goes back to some of the stressors they faced, of course, when they were in the service. So a large number of the folks I deal with who have cognitive impairment have also unfortunately had post-traumatic stress disorder. And that unfortunately is a predisposing factor for cognitive decline. A
Why,
large number.
why, PTSD, we know it's traumatic, it's in the name. What is
Yeah.
it about that that translates into problems later on?
So,
Uh,
so
I,
on,
I mean, health problems, not mental. We know it's a mental
right,
problem.
right, absolutely, absolutely. And so I'll say up front, I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, though I deal with this frequently, and so I'm not an expert. But it's clear that it alters the brain chemistry, and that alteration in brain chemistry likely has long-term effects. I mean, we know that even for folks who have mental health issues, there's a biochemical basis. So the extrapolation would be that there are long-term impacts. And by the way, unfortunately, these often go hand in hand with traumatic brain injury too. Though I think we're going to have a whole new generation for that when you think about the folks who served over in the Middle East because of the improvised explosive devices. Yeah, they're different, and so many of my veterans for whom I care, when they have cognitive decline, it's a combination most likely of a blood vessel underlying pathology, a vascular dementia, and then maybe a partial contribution with Alzheimer's disease. We're the Alzheimer's Disease Association, which is a wonderful, wonderful organization, both nationally and locally, has been very successful in being able to promote the awareness for dementia, though it's been very much an Alzheimer's focused dementia, which many would believe is the most common type of dementia. In veterans, that's not likely the case. It's likely more vascular pathology. Many of the folks for whom I care, they were cigarette smokers early on. They may have had diabetes and hypertension. When you pull that together, so with diabetes, hypertension, you might have high lipids and cholesterol. Over the years, that makes a difference with the blood supply to the brain, with microscopic changes and what we call infarcts that can lead to cognitive decline. By the way, on top of that, if they do have PTSD, they might have, unfortunately, an influence with alcohol use disorder. So there are multiple contributing factors, which again is why, as a geriatrician, I actually am there not so much to focus on the individual disease, but to maximize those things that can hopefully lift them to a higher level of function, which oftentimes means, are they on the right medication, or are they on a medication which might seem to help in one circumstance, but might actually be a disadvantage in another. But I can tell you this, I love working with veterans. I think they're special. I'm very fortunate that as an investigator, I've been supported on an ongoing basis for over 20 years with VA, what's called VA merit review funding. It's very similar to NIH funding, where we have to compete in a very rigorous manner with peer review committees to be able to get that award. And I think it's wonderful to be able to work with veterans who, as members of our clinical trials, they're wonderful team members because they know how to be part of a team. And so it's always very satisfying when, and it's mostly guys, so we're trying to have an increasing number of female veterans, but when our guys are there and they're coming to get their high intensity interval training 3 times a week, or they're willing to try a nutritional supplement, or we have another pilot trial we just finished, and now we're applying for larger funding to see whether blue light in the morning for 30 minutes might help to regularize circadian rhythms, improve sleep, and then actually improve cognition or maintain cognition with older veterans.
Are you optimistic about that one?
Oh, very, very much so. I mean, part of the challenge is, sleep. I think we all can agree. I think we
Yeah.
can all agree that if we don't get a good night's sleep, we feel worse for it. If we progressively are not getting good sleep, then the impacts for cognitive decline, for a number of other comorbidities, and sometimes, especially for veterans, this involves sleep apnea, they're going to have a big impact on even cardiovascular disease. And so I think if we can find ways, and there's more than one way to skin this cat, to somehow get people to have better sleep, and this is often in the setting where, unfortunately, if there's cognitive decline or PTSD, it's very challenging, that people are going to be better off for it. So studies are being done. I can't tell you conclusively that we can give you answers. Our goal is not only to do this in general, but to really focus on older adults and older veterans, as may be the case over at the VA. So oftentimes these issues are not addressed until people are in their 60s or 70s, though I think it'd be better if we all paid attention to them when we're 30 or 40, but that's a little bit too late for us.
Yeah, it's so poignant that from what you've described, that veterans um, are affected by the coping mechanisms and self-medication, whether it's a cigarette or a drink or drugs,
Yeah, yeah,
that just to get through, or sleeping pill, whatever it is, just to get through the day, that ends up haunting them toward the end. Now,
yeah.
I'm going to shift gears, Bruce.
Okay,
I want to talk about you and your brother Mark at Harvard,
okay,
the two twins. What did Mark do with his life?
okay. And he's still doing it, fortunately.
What is he still
So,
doing?
yes, right. Well, you used past tense there, and I just wanted to shift that just a little bit.
I
Uh,
don't like to make assumptions, but
yes, right, right. Okay. So Mark actually, I think, was an economics major, and then got a degree in architecture, and then
oh,
went, and he got the degree. He got, I think, got the degree in architecture at Harvard, and then went to Wharton and got his MBA. And so he has, over the years, been very interested in real estate, and has worked for a number of organizations. And this is unfortunately more affected by our economic travails than others. But presently, he's been able to take this, and over the last, oh wow, I think it's 15 years or more, he's actually been a faculty member, an adjunct faculty member for a while at NYU, but now has a regular position in the, let me make sure I get this right, I think it's in the School of Architecture, but he teaches real estate business within the School of Architecture. Mark, if you ever watch this, I hope I didn't get that wrong.
that's at
But
NYU. That's at
yeah,
NYU.
well, no, that's at University of Miami now. So that was just
Oh,
for a
okay.
few years at NYU, and he's done this at the University of Miami. I think it's for well over 10 years now. And of course, in some ways, it makes sense if you're going to be an architect. If you want to understand not just buildings and how they're built, but what goes into the environment that predisposes to that. So he teaches. I don't know if I want to call it real estate business, and so he's at a regular class and has done very well for himself in that regard. And so in a sense, not in a sense, he's an academician, though
Yeah,
he's come at it from a very different way, and really came into academics from the real world. I guess I've never been in the
never
real world,
been in the real world. Well,
but
listen,
he's been in the real world.
yeah, no, that's great. And you're right. You said you were identical, right?
Yes, we are,
How
and
much
we.
did you see of each other at Harvard? Was it every day? Was it every week? How close were you at Harvard?
Well, so it's interesting. In the first year, we were both in Weld, but we were on opposite sides. I think I was on the. Let me think about this. I think he was on the north side of Weld, and I was on the south side of Weld. But we actually roomed with each other for the remaining 3 years.
Oh,
But I will,
interesting.
but I'll tell you, and I think he would say the same. There were times where I felt like I didn't see him for a week or so because we had different interests and
Yeah.
activities. Um, so yes, I would see him in the room, but outside of there, and the one of the things that I remember is that so oftentimes we'd be mistaken for each other, and I think he would deny this. So I hope I'm not going to embarrass him too much. But this is my recollection that people might come up and address me as Mark, and I say, no, no, I'm not Mark, I'm Bruce, and people might address him as Bruce, but he either didn't respond or didn't bother correcting him. That's my faint memory there. But we had very different interests in that regard. I was much more athletically inclined. I played on intramural teams, which I thought was a blast. In our gaggle, I remember at one point, I don't know if you saw my note. People were talking about the wonderful teachers and professors we had, and that was fantastic. But I put in a note and I said, well, I want to let people know that I had a lot of fun at Harvard. I was in the band, so I was going to football games, hockey games. We actually, in the band, we had the first ever between period ice show. We were all on skates.
I can only imagine what that looked like. And did you know Bob Rowley?
Oh yeah, sure. Well,
Yeah.
Bob. So and I saw Bob too. I know you're a fellow journalist, of course, and I know
Yeah.
you interviewed him. I watched that one. Oh no, I talked with Bob, and we were both in Mather House. So yes, and Bob was in the I forget what we call it, the drum corps. Not he didn't play an instrument, but he was in the boy. I have a brain fart right now. But we had folks who would help us do things
Yeah.
for the.
And
Oh
did
yeah, no that.
you played an instrument?
Oh yeah, clarinet, which
Oh,
I've not done
clarinet.
very much.
Fantastic.
But
No, it's
I had fun. We're playing sports, intramural sports.
yeah.
I think if you remember, in the fall, I think both soccer and football winners, the top three winners at Harvard, would play the top three house winners at Yale, and depending upon where the
Oh,
game was.
I remember it well on the LA House soccer team 3 years in a row. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was on the Mather House soccer team, but I had a problem because as a bandy, I should have been out there practicing for the halftime show. And I'm not sure how I did this, but I was able to play the first half of our soccer game, our inter-university soccer game.
Yeah.
I think we were third place, so we played the third place Yale team. It was still important from my perspective. And
Yeah.
I remember I was able to get away and if I don't have to bend my elbow too much, I actually scored a goal in the first half. And
Wow.
when I left, it was 1-0. The final score was 2-1 for our Mather House team. I
Nice.
like to say, and I am smiling there, that I scored the winning goal. Of course, who knows which one was the winning goal? Okay, but then I was able to go ahead and join the band for the rest of practice
Oh my
and
God,
play on the field.
you're the Bo Jackson of Harvard.
Oh, that's very funny. Well, Bo
That's
never played
a
hockey,
great
but we did.
story, though.
I love playing intramural hockey. There's just so much fun at Harvard, and it's
It's
not,
funny.
it wasn't
I'm
stressful, but
I think you might. God knows. I think I've done about 40 of these. You might be the first person who's actually said the word "fun," and I think the people who I knew who definitely had fun were the band people in the band
yep.
and the rugby team.
Oh, that's funny.
And
Yes.
those two, like the fun was kind of baked in. The part, maybe the final. I don't know anything about the final clubs. Maybe the final club people would say the same thing.
I bet they
But
might. Yeah.
but I think that's it's a good place to end here. And I would even because I love to tie things in a bow. I
Sure.
would even say if you want to live a long and happy life, have some fun.
Yes. Absolutely.
Have some fun, and you're doing great. And hopefully, all of our classmates will do as well as you. But Bruce, this is so interesting to have you on because your knowledge, and thank you for sharing so much of it. Your knowledge is so specific and relevant to what all of us are, either going through now or facing very soon. So thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Bet. My pleasure. Thank you very much.
And thanks for doing this, and see you at the next reunion.
You bet. We'll go for 55 and on.
55 and on. Thanks.
Okay. Fantastic.